Namaste everyone. So today we are going to speak about George Gurdjieff and his main, in a sense, disciple and spiritual partner, Peter Ouspensky. Some of you may know pretty well who was Mr. Gurdjieff and Mr. Ouspensky, and some of you, of course, know nothing about both of them. Let me say briefly. That's two great Russian esoteric gurus who lived in the first half of 20th century. Basically modern Western esoteric tradition created slightly by Russians, and of course first personality whom we may mention in this wonderful process of creation of modern esoteric tradition was Madame Blavatsky, who lived in the second half of 19th century, and she was a founder of Theosophical Society, which was extremely influential in the second part of 19th century and in the beginning of 20th century. Now, we don't remember too much about Theosophical Society, but at that time, let me repeat, end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, almost everyone was under influence of Theosophical Society, philosophy, teaching, and just information. All people in Europe, England, France, Germany, and in the United States, all people who were at least somehow interested in spirituality and esoteric tradition were involved in the Theosophical Society in this or that way. Of course, we may mention some more great Russians who are also part of this huge process, and one of them is Leo Tolstoy, whom we know as a writer, as the top level classical Russian writer. But he was not only the guy who wrote and published a number of wonderful novels. He was also a religious and mystical and esoteric thinker and philosopher, and his totally amazing approach to the teaching of Jesus the Christ really transformed many people in Russia, in Europe, and all over the world. Another couple of guys who are really important in this process. We can mention two more names. Is Nicholas Roerich and his wife Elena Roerich. Nicholas Roerich was a great artist and spiritual leader, mystic, guru. He spent most of his life in Himalayas, but from that region of Himalayas, actually it's a Kulu Manali area, he was influencing spiritual processes all over the world, in Europe and the United States. Let us anyway come back to Mr. Gurdjieff and his main disciple, Peter Ouspensky. Gurdjieff was, and actually even now remains, the absolutely mysterious personality. Actually we even are not sure when he was born, and different authors they speak about like 1870, 1878, even 1865. Just something like second half of 19th century. We don't know even his exact birthday. Anyway, his spent first half of his life traveling to the different Oriental countries, and it was huge quest for the truth, quest for the ancient, secret, sacred, esoteric knowledge. So he spent years in Greece, meeting different Christian mystics who we call in the Orthodox Christian tradition starts. He spent time in Egypt, in Syria, and then he went to Afghanistan and even Tibet. According to certain information, he spent years in India as well, but mostly it was Tibet and Afghanistan. Later on, something like 1912, he appeared in Moscow and Petersburg and started to teach people very unusual spiritual tradition. But what was the roots of that tradition? We may guess and suppose, but really it's difficult to say even about sources of this tradition. Normally people say, okay, Gurdjieff means Sufi master. But basically, why people in the West and in Russia as well call him Sufi master? Mostly because of his Sufi dances. Okay, after so-called Russian Communist Revolution, which was actually anti-Russian, but anyway, it's happened in 1917, Gurdjieff and a band of his close disciples, they escaped Russia because it was too dangerous to stay, because of revolution, because of civil war, and he came to Germany, then to France, and he visited the United States as well. And in 20s he performed a lot of, Sufi dance programs, performances, and that's the reason why people decided to call him Sufi master, because of very famous at that time, 1920s, beginning, middle and end of 20s, all that Sufi dance performance. But really the greatest source for the Gurdjieff tradition was Tibetan Buddhism, or better to call it Tantric Buddhism. Okay, many people all over the world actually know that Russia is the Orthodox Christian country, but not so many people know that at least half of the population are basically Muslims, belong to the Sunni tradition. And it means that Sufi tradition, which is connected with the Islamic religion, Sunni Islamic religion especially, it's a part of Russian spiritual tradition as well. And what is really important, that since I believe some 17th century, at least two big Buddhist areas, they are part of Russia, and it means Tantric Buddhist tradition is also part of spiritual and religious tradition of Russia. These two areas we call Kalmykia, and the second one Buryatia. These two areas, where Mongolian people live for centuries, and because Buryatia and Kalmykia for centuries part of Russia, so it means Tibetan, or better to say Tantric Buddhist tradition, is the part of spiritual life in Russia. And Westerners for centuries could not penetrate Tibet, but it was much easier for Russians, because actually Tantric Buddhist tradition is the part of Russian spiritual life. Many lamas from Russia visited Tibet easily, and according to the certain information which we have in the end of 19th century, Gurdjieff himself also spent time in Tibet while learning different meditation in the mantra tradition, and even more than that, he became a lama. So it's a huge and slightly confusing story, because it looked like that he became a Buddhist monk and even lama, and met quite many yogis in Tibet at that time, end of 19th century. But at the same time, well, he got married, and even we know about that two of his sons later on became lamas as well. So Gurdjieff tradition is a huge synthesis of esoteric Christianity, which he came across this esoteric tradition in Russia itself, in Greece and Syria. Also Tantric Buddhist tradition, and of course some influence of Sufi mystical tradition as well. But the Western mystical schools are also, I think we can call them also part of his personal tradition, which he started to call Fourth Way, or sometimes he just call it the work, in a sense, spiritual work. As I mentioned, in that time, end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, almost everyone in the West was under influence of Theosophical Society, which was the main project of Madame Blavatsky. And Gurdjieff was also the part of this Theosophical Society, world, space. But you know, he was pretty soon disappointed with the Theosophical Society because of quite a number of reasons. Very important point for the Theosophical Society is personality of the great Himalayan Mahatmas. And Madame Blavatsky, he mentioned about Mahatma Maurya and Mahatma Kuthumi. At least two names we have, but it's looked like really Madame Blavatsky came across and met some great number of highly advanced Himalayan mystics, but mostly she spoke about Mahatma Maurya and Mahatma Kuthumi. And you know, this mysterious personality is a huge magnet in a Theosophical Society tradition, but at the same time it's a huge problem, because okay, Madame Blavatsky herself met these great masters, and maybe a couple of dozens of disciples of Madame Blavatsky also met them. But then people outside of this inner circle of Theosophical Society, they ask the question, okay, how can we meet that Mahatmas? And it seems it's not so easy. Later on, people started to suppose that maybe Madame Blavatsky just created a fantasy about these masters. Honestly speaking, I myself personally, I don't think that this is a fantasy created by Madame Blavatsky. I think that such masters really do exist, and Madame Blavatsky, and by the way, really quite a number of people connected with the Theosophical Society, they also met Mahatma Maurya and Mahatma Kuthumi. But Gurdjieff, in the end of 19th century, also wanted to meet them, but it was impossible for him because of, I don't know, any reason, but he didn't Actually, he was not able to find that Mahatmas, and that was a huge disappointment for him. Anyway, because of influence of Tantric Buddhist tradition and esoteric Christianity and Sufi traditions, Gurdjieff created his own personal spiritual tradition, school, and the main point there was not some mysterious masters from Himalayas or even Lord God himself. He started to speak about very essential question, the question of self-inquiry. Now we know about this self-inquiry pretty well from different sources, and Ramana Maharshi was speaking about self-inquiry, and before even Ramana Maharshi, Swami Vivekananda, who visited the United States and Europe in the end of 19th century, he also actually introduced the idea of self-inquiry. But at the same time, the way George Gurdjieff introduced this idea, this concept, this spiritual approach of self-inquiry to the West, I think it was very special. Culturally speaking, Ramana Maharshi was too South Indian. Swami Vivekananda was too much political and too much involved in a religious struggle for the Hindu religion, and also he was, of course, part of many political movements, sometimes indirectly, but Swami Vivekananda, he spoke about self-inquiry, but it was too much Hindu-Christian struggle in his mind and political stuff as well. Gurdjieff was actually perfect Westerner. By the way, it's important to mention that he was not Russian, ethnically speaking. He was half Armenian and half Greek. But anyway, Orthodox Christian and perfect Westerner. And his main disciple, Peter Ouspensky, was ethnic Russian and also basically Christian person. Why I'm mentioning about all that? Because both of them, I mean Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, were Westerners, and they introduced this idea of self-inquiry in a totally different way, not like Vivekananda or Yogananda Paramahamsa or Ramana Maharshi. That was more clear and pure form of self-inquiry. You know, self-inquiry, this crucial question, who am I? What is the nature of my consciousness? It's absolutely, outside of any religion, any like Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, absolutely outside of that. And honestly speaking, great masters like Yogananda Paramahamsa or Ramana Maharshi or Vivekananda Swami, they are still part of religious game of Hinduism, and in the case of Yogananda Paramahamsa, even slightly Christianity. But Gurdjieff and Ouspensky were perfectly outside of any religion. That's the beauty and that's the clarity of that kind of self-inquiry they introduced to the Western world. You know, I myself spent years, almost, all my life in India, and I observed all that Indian yogic ashrams, and the huge questions appeared in my mind, because in India, unfortunately, all that yogic ashrams actually they are part of Hindu religion, and that's not really nice. You know, it's interesting, here in India, and at the moment I'm traveling in India, visiting different holy places and meet different mystics at the moment. You know, here in India, some modern thinking Indians, they're also very happy about the situation that, okay, almost all Indian ashrams, they teach meditation in different yogic traditions, but at the same time they're part of Hindu religion. Actually, spirituality can't be part of any religion, not Christian, not Buddhist, not Hindu. And you know, sometimes we forget about it and start to learn, okay, different types of meditation while staying in a Hindu ashram or Buddhist ashram. And we forget about, you know, the subtle question, the subtle, you know, reality of the spirit. And this is, you know, that meditation and self-inquiry can't be part of any religion, no Christian, no Buddhist, no Hindu. It's actually very much beyond all that religious tradition, which are, by the way, nice in a sense. So, Gurdjieff and later his main disciple Ouspensky, they clearly told to the Western world, come on guys, you're just robots, you're just machines, you are just unconscious, you are in a complete conditioning of the social environments, so you're not conscious about even the fact of your self-existence. And that was a starting point for Gurdjieff and Ouspensky philosophy. Just self-remembrance, at least self-remembrance, and then the next step is the huge and a deep self-inquiry. And you know, I think that even now influence of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky is huge. And in English language we have a quite number of wonderful researches, books on Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and I strongly recommend you to read them, because you will really discover a huge source for inspiration, motivation, if we can say, and you know, proper foundation for the spirituality. Of course, in the case of both of them, I mean Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, the weakness of their tradition was that it was too much like personal and depended on personality of that wonderful and bright gurus, I mean Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. In the presence of Gurdjieff was huge spiritual work and self-inquiry. In the presence of Ouspensky, that was also a huge spiritual work. But if Gurdjieff and Ouspensky not in the room, then no disciple knew what to do, what to practice. And that was kind of weakness of this tradition. I mean to say, when after Second World War, both of them, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, left this wonderful world, they passed away, then the question was for the band of disciples in France, Germany, England and the United States, okay, what to do next? I need to say, many esoteric traditions traditions like Kriya Yoga meditation, Navanatha Sampradaya tradition, Tantric Buddhist tradition, and many other kinds of spirituality, they have a structure, and it means even if master, if guru know more, tradition continue, because like we have techniques, we have tools, we have clear scriptures, and also what is most important, we have techniques, tools for the self-inquiry and self-development. In the case of, for example, Kriya Yoga tradition, to which basically I belong, you know, we have a Kriya Yoga meditation techniques, we have a Bija mantra meditation techniques, and even if this or that master, okay, passing away, anyway, tradition continue because we have a structure which was absent in the case of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Okay, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky left this wonderful planet in the middle of 20th century, but at the same time influence is huge. When we learn biographies of both of them, when we read books written by Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and also books written about both of them, all that intellectual, the spiritual space is a huge source of inspiration and valuable information for the real deep and subtle spirituality. Of course, we can't speak about Gurdjieff tradition in an exact way, in exact pure form right now, because his tradition could exist only in his presence. Okay, let me complete my video about Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and I think that we'll come back to this topic many times more in the future, because it's extremely interesting and important, just to know about this huge source of proper spirituality. God bless you. See you next time.